The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain. Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 100 of the Your Mountain podcast.
Unbelievable.
100. We've done 100, well, after this, we will have done 100 episodes of this podcast.
I can't believe people have that much time.
That's like an episode for every listener.
That's right. It's one for all of you.
Twice. In all seriousness, though, this started as just a kind of a fun project for a couple of guys or three of us to stay in touch and get together and talk policy around natural resources, and it's turned into a really cool endeavor for us, and we're really having a good time and glad that everybody's sticking with us. And we thought for number 100, the most appropriate episode to do for number 100 would be the episode that is really the reason why we even have this podcast in the first instance. Because we wouldn't have this podcast if the three of us didn't get to know each other working together. And we got to work together, as many of you who listen know. We got to work together when we worked for the former Governor of Wyoming, Mead, who happens to be our guest today.
Is he our guest or are we his guest?
For the first time ever, he's our guest.
Well,
right?
We're at his house.
Well, that's true. I guess
it's his garage.
We're still technically his guest.
Yeah. Welcome to my garage. Just glad to have you here in my garage.
It's a lot nicer than my garage. I'm going to give it to you.
Nicer than my house. But most things are nicer than anything that I own. So
it just needed that car, and it's better than my house. What car are we? Are you doing a restoration?
Well, I have been. I bought that car the year before I got married. So that car's I've had it about 30 years. It's a 1967 Firebird. And slowly and surely over 30 years, I have broken stuff and tried to repair it. But I just got it repainted, and so that's glad to get that done. So, but let me congratulate the three of you. 100. I had no idea. I knew having you in the office, you all like to talk. Yeah. But I had no idea that you had 100 episodes in you, and so congratulations.
Well, we credit. I don't know.
I don't have to do a lot of talking for that, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Those were the first words Mike said in a month.
98 episodes.
No, but it really. You might not know this. We actually started this while you were still governor.
We had the blessing of the great Carrie Jo Gray.
Oh, my chief of staff blessed it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's too late for me to talk to her about it, I guess.
Because we said, here's the deal. We promise we won't tell anybody what we do. It'll just be Dave, Nephi, and Mike, just three random guys talking about policy in the great outdoors. And they just happen to have way more knowledge about it than they should. And that's kind of how we wade into it, is talk about natural resource issues. But we promise not to ever mention the office or mention what we did. So,
well, I'm glad to learn about it after the fact, because I'm thinking about the headline. Three senior people at the office said what?
Yeah. We were very careful those first few months on the topics that we took on. Let's just put it that way. It started right at the tail end of your administration. We needed jobs. We thought, well, we got to figure out what we're going to do next. Maybe this podcast will take off.
Yeah, maybe we can monetize podcasting, which is clearly a disaster.
Turns out you cannot do that.
You can monetize podcasting
just
if you sell podcasting equipment, podcasting host websites, how-to videos on how to make a podcast, but not making a podcast.
Yeah.
Well, I was very curious as you pulled up if you were all going to be driving new pickup trucks or not, and it didn't look that way. So
no.
You're getting wealthy later on this.
Sure.
The
residuals.
That's what we're going with. Yeah. It really is turned into this is just a great way for three friends to stay in touch and get together and have a good time and continue to dip our toes in these policy waters that you had us
a lot of fun, though.
drowning in for years.
Well, the fun part, first of all, we get to argue with each other, and then and then act like we hate each other, but we don't. And then I get nasty emails for picking on Dave all the time. So I'm the nasty email guy. But I think the cool thing about it is, honestly, there are so many natural resource issues that people don't understand. And for us, we sat back and we watched that and we said, okay, well, who's gonna talk about these things and actually provide people, background rather than just, garbage. And that's kind of what started us out is, trying to really, it's kind of wonky, but to tell people actually when they're talking about LWCF, what is it really? When they're talking about waters of the U.S. or the Endangered Species Act, what is it really? Because a lot of podcasts out there have, people who are just kind of expressing opinions and giving commentary. But if you're really
regurgitating headlines.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we just wanted to have something out there so that people who really wanted to know, would listen to us and then provide an alternative voice at that water cooler.
Well, I appreciate you doing it. As the three of you know very well, even when we were in office and we were dealing with conservation issues, water issues, policy issues, a lot of times at the state level and even when we traveled to Washington, D.C., the people who were trying to convince of a particular point of view didn't have what we would have liked to seen in terms of background, and then also just even the press itself were eager to learn from the three of you in particular about some of the background and some of the issues we were working on. So I applaud you for doing this.
Well, we thank you, and actually we owe a lot of, as Nephi said, we owe a lot of it to you because we had the opportunity to really dive into a lot of these issues in ways that most people never have the opportunity to do so. And we wanted to reflect some today with you. But before we do that,
I think the first main question has got to be, all three of us worked for you. What were you thinking?
Well, I had scoured the state, and everybody else was employed. I had done such a good job as governor. There was 0% unemployment, except 3 people were left. And so, no, in all seriousness, I couldn't have been more blessed with getting the three of you and the entire staff, as you know, not only at the high level, but also just good people and fun people to work around and be around. And so it was a great office, and I was lucky to have the three of you. And as we may go through today, some of the things that we worked on and accomplished, I give credit to the three of you and other members of the staff for getting so much done during our 8 years.
So before we dive into that, we do have to know, what is it that a retired governor does?
Well, he reflects upon mistakes he made when he was hiring people.
So once those 30 seconds have passed,
today and right now,
yeah. Other than this exact moment, what else do you do?
Well, I suspect every governor does something a little different, but I'm fortunate. I have a good relationship with Governor Sullivan and Governor Friedenthal, and we chat occasionally, and everyone's doing something a little different. For Carol and I, we've enjoyed having a little more free time, a lot more free time. And as the three of you know, because you've all been there, we have a ranch outside of Laramie, Wyoming, and we've enjoyed very much being there and having time to be there. And then here in Cheyenne, we have a place, and you're in my shop now, and I don't know that I actually build anything or fix anything, but I do putter around here and spend a lot of time doing stuff. So it's enjoyable. I'm on a publicly traded board and do some charity work as well, which I enjoy very much to have the time to do that and hopefully do some good out there in the state and the country. And so that's how I'm spending my time. And I find myself actually the days go pretty fast. I seem like I'm pretty busy, but it's nice also, to have some time and to reflect on the 8 years. And there's things I miss, and there's things that I miss not at all.
What are some of the things you miss?
Well, I miss when I first got out, I sort of avoided reading the newspaper because you just at some point you just got to let go. So I made the decision, when I'm done, I'm just, rather than reading it and say this is what I would do or this is good or whatever, we just sort of took a break from that. But I do miss, the opportunity to do something that I think advances the interests of the state. But most of all, I miss the people that I had the privilege to work with and learn from during my time in office. I often said that being governor is nothing if it's not a great education, because as the three of you know, because you were there, one day you'll be working on issue with forest fires. The next day you'll be working on an issue of homelessness. The next day you'll be working on, what should the budget be? And you touch a lot of different areas, and you rely upon a lot of people that have expertise. And in doing that, you learn a lot over 8 years. And I'm not sure I retained it, but during that time period, I learned a lot. So it was great.
We're going to test some of your retention.
No, we're not.
That was never.
This is
why you guys aren't making money. You don't advance.
I did. Yeah, I was going to mention that. How one of the things you've got to miss is us writing the briefings for you, so you know what to say.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. I had that packet. Carrie my chief of staff would send me home every night, and when you come here in the morning, you better know this stuff. And you all supplied the material. That
was one of the things that just shocked me about you that I don't think anybody else knew. Is I think I've got somewhat your day-to-day mapped out, and if you don't mind me sharing it,
sure.
You'd get up well before sunup, like some ridiculous early hour in the morning, like 4:30 or 5 a.m. or something like that. Go lift weights, eat steak and eggs, read voraciously, and then show up at the office before any of us showed up at 8 a.m. And then you get in there, be in meetings all day long, crunching papers, reading. And I remember going into briefings, and very clearly, I I think the modus operandi was this. I expected that when I went into a meeting, you probably knew more about the subject that I briefed you, but you came in and no matter who was at the table, if people think that they came in and sat down around the table in your office and it was the first time that you were hearing a subject, they were wrong. So every time you sat down, I noted that you would always have questions ready, proposals, thoughts ready to go. So they thought they were hitting you for the first time on these issues, but you were always kind of a step ahead. And even though you're hearing it from them, you already had a direction to go that was, that was surprising to a lot of people, including and not shocking to any of us, but it made it so that, you were never behind the curve and learning about something. But you did that all day long, and then you run until whatever hour in the afternoon or, after 5 o'clock all the time. Go back and do more work.
Well, you're way too kind. To the extent I was prepared, it was the three of you getting me prepared, and I distinctly remember many occasions, whether it was Mike or you, Nephi, or you, Dave, just being amazed at the depth of the information you provided to me, and then my questions were, isn't that interesting? So I wasn't as well briefed as, I didn't absorb it as well as you're giving me credit for, but you all prepared me well.
Well, you asked the right questions to make us believe that you knew it better than we did. That must be the attorney in you coming out, because you always had a way of asking. We'd put a briefing document together, and then if we had 5 minutes or 10 minutes with you, you'd spend 45 minutes trying to prepare for that 5 or 10 minutes because you were trying to anticipate what questions you might have about the document. You didn't want to. You wanted to make sure that you had the answer that you needed. So it was.
My experience was the question never came from whatever briefing I put together. It came from somewhere else that was based upon some nugget of information. I was like, well, I should have known that. There he goes.
Well, you all answered the questions very well, so I appreciated it.
I think people take it for granted when they have these public officials that work with them that that these folks are sitting around an office just kind of, watching TV and eating lunch or doing something else. They don't understand at that high level the amount of work and commitment that people are putting in. And I just think that's important for people to know about, so that there's respect when you get an opportunity to spend some time with those elected officials, that there's some humility and some cognizance of the amount of work that those people are putting in, for their constituents, for the people that they serve. And I think it's unknown to 99% of the public.
Well, I give the credit back to the three of you and the rest of the staff. I've told Carrie on a couple of occasions, I said, I don't know if I have any talent save that I can spot talent. And our office was full of talent. We had good people.
Well, good people gravitate to good leaders.
Well,
right?
They're kind.
And so it was, I can tell you from my perspective, it's been the absolute highlight of my career to be able to learn from watching you work, and to be able to work for the state and to work for you. It's sort of that snapshot in time that you can never get back, but it's something that I'll cherish forever.
Well, me too. I mean, to have those years where we were able to help the state and do stuff even nationally, I mean, that's a special privilege to have that, to be in that position where you can work on stuff, work to help the state we all love. So it was a great opportunity.
So I wrote down a short list of kind of some of the things you've done, and I'm not going to get them all right.
Would you call it a briefing document?
I would have, but I called Dave and I was like, should we give him a briefing document? Dave goes, well, that's not my idea, so let's just run with whatever you can think up. And
if you have a briefing document, I'm sure I'll have questions.
Well, I think I think you were in office for 2 years when I had the opportunity to start working for you, and I remember the first things I came on board. You were working on forest management planning. You were working on BLM, area resource planning, and that was in the natural resource team. And then that's when you started the first energy strategy, the Wyoming energy strategy.
Right.
After the energy strategy, this was the first state. You were the first governor to tell to say, hey, we're going to do baseline water quality testing before any development and after development. The first state in the nation to do that. Reclamation planning, mitigation planning. You had state primacy and ESA reform in that first energy strategy. You had developing a state water strategy in that first energy strategy. You had a forest management plan. After that, you had an outdoor recreation plan. You had a state-level water plan. You had bears and wolves. You had sage grouse planning. You had
those are the highlights.
Yeah, I think you pretty much touched on one or two things that were going on.
Yeah.
You really did a ton. When I went back and looked through it, I had forgotten so many of the things, so many of the projects, and it was mind-boggling. Like it was amazing. Just if you were to, tell somebody like, oh yeah, do this one thing, but then when you start lining them all out, all the things, there's a lot. What was your favorite?
Oh, Nephi. So can I answer a question with a question?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would really have to reflect upon what my favorite was. But because there were many that as I look back now that I think were really important. I would say that the work we all did on the Endangered Species Act was really important, and you want to be able to work on something that has an effect not just while you're in office, but beyond the time you're in office. And you listed many things there that I think that we moved the ball on and will stick, not just during our time in office. But the Endangered Species Act, and all of you worked on that in different ways. We were. It wasn't just what we did in terms of substance. I think it was how we did it, and it's how we did the energy policy. And we all learned that before you make a sea change in any given area in natural resources, you first have to start in a place of good faith and know why this is important. Then you have to recognize that stakeholders are stakeholders for a reason, and it's because they have a passion for an area. They care about wolves or they care about water, and they may have a different point of view than you. And if you're willing to reach out to them, not only will you get buy-in at the end product, they may agree or disagree with you, but along that path where you reach out to those stakeholders and seek their input, you're going to learn something, and you're going to learn something valuable, and you may change your point of view. And so I think those things that the three of you worked on and I worked on, I think we did a very good job, not just in the substance, but I think we were able to achieve the substantive changes in part because the way that we went about it and the outreach that we had. And then being, just very sharp on the law, what we were doing. We had to know the law better than anybody else, and you all made that happen for us. So those are certainly some highlights, but I think about the pipeline corridor, how important that was, and that was, that's another example of work that continues. I happened to, on Sunday night, 3 days ago, I turned on the television and the 60 Minutes episode was on, which is always a good program and interesting. And they had two particular segments that I was interested in. One was, I think the caption was Yellowstone Wolves. And so I stayed tuned on that. And it was an amazing episode, and I think balanced. They talked to people who were coming from all over the world to go to Yellowstone to see the wolves, the passion they had for the wolves. And then they talked to some of them in the ag community. And they talked about sort of this way that things are now, which is an acceptance that wolves are going to be in Yellowstone and surrounding areas, but also that the work that we did allowed a balance with regard to ag, allowed a balance in terms of moose populations and elk populations, allowed a balance that, nothing's perfect, but I think outdoor people, hunters, sportsmen, I think they appreciate as well that we tried to find a way forward rather than just sitting in court for another decade and nothing good happening. And so those are things that I think we did that were of substance, and I think we went about it the right way. And I still remember sort of coming up with an idea of how we could manage the wolves in Yellowstone and yet have a hunting season outside of Yellowstone, and you all are familiar with that. And having Secretary Salazar, who, personally made multiple trips to Wyoming, and with just him and I sitting down saying, we've been fighting about this, meaning we, the federal government and the state, for all this time. There's got to be a path forward. And he worked in earnest and in good faith. We didn't always agree. We had some serious disagreements. But it's that sort of teamwork, listening to other points of view, that eventually led us to, I think, a good place.
Well, and right now that good place is wolves were delisted and survived judicial review. Under your watch.
Yeah.
And so the state of Wyoming's been managing wolves now for several years. There have been hunting seasons. There's still a stable, in fact, in some places, I think you'd argue a growing wolf population.
Yeah.
The wolves, they're showing up in Colorado or showing up.
On Dave's photos, hiking.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, I believe this or not, I have a picture. I was hiking with my family up by Laramie Peak. Took a picture of a wolf up there.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that, those were the two things. We had to first convince that when we talked about changes, we had to convince those who were passionate about no hunting that we weren't out to, kill all the wolves in the state, but we wanted some ability to manage it, again, for sportsmen and for ag, and just the balance that is needed. Wildlife is managed in the state of Wyoming. And just that notion, and Secretary Salazar and I talked about this a number of times, I said the wildlife within the boundaries of the state of Wyoming belong to the people of Wyoming. And we not only have, I think, the legal right for management, but we're in the best position to do it. The federal presence just doesn't match the state presence in terms of numbers or on-the-ground expertise in so many areas. And so our plan was to have a sustainable population. Our plan was for it to survive judicial review. And our plan was to make sure that the appropriate balance was there, and I think we achieved that.
I think so, too.
Why do you think there's so much reluctance, or do you think, not to assume that, but there's reluctance from people to having states more involved and playing a bigger role in government? I think wolves are a great example, but it seems like in some cases, in a variety of cases, there's not a whole lot of trust to letting state elected officials make those decisions in terms of laws. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a great question, Nephi, and it's one that always sort of we fought against, because I just believe that states are in a very good position, not just regarding natural resources, but all areas, to do a good job managing it. But when we brought that up with people who disagreed with me, they would point to any certain example where the states have failed. And that's a legitimate point. Hey, we may have failed here, we may have failed here. But what I pointed out to them is, if you say that the state failed in a particular area and we did something wrong, say regarding water in a particular area, we can point to, if you're keeping score that way, how many times has Congress failed in any given area? How many times have they made mistakes? How many times have they had to go back and correct things that they make mistakes?
Yeah, and also discounts sort of the growth and learning that we can demonstrate as states too. So.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where the notion that states are the laboratories of innovation and democracy is, that we can do it different. We can learn from one another. Idaho can do something a little different than Texas and Wyoming. And we should have that flexibility, because that's where you're going to get the best ideas. And you have to, as the three of us, four of us, I think, are in agreement, states' rights are important. But as I always said, and I remember my grandfather saying before me many times, with state rights comes state responsibility. If you want to pound on the table about states' rights, then you need to do the right thing. You need to be responsible. And then you need to recognize that in today's day and age, the federal government is, especially in a state that is, the surface and minerals are so heavily owned by the federal government, you have to take that into account. You have to work with them.
Yeah, I got to admit, circling back to the wolf example really quick, I really struggle with, I've heard the argument of state mismanagement is why wolves were here in the first place. And I always have to remind people that the last wolf killed in Wyoming was killed by the National Park Service when they would lay cyanide in bison in a dead carcass in the park to bring wolves in and kill them. And the last one, to my recollection, was actually killed by the National Park Service, by the federal government. I mean, it was a joint effort to get rid of wolves. And so I always struggle with the notion that it's in all these situations it's on the state. And I've actually felt like in a lot of cases, and you were touching on this too, states are more nimble,
right,
to be able to if they make a mistake, to be able to correct for that mistake.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. not only nimble in terms of saying we made a mistake, but in the time frame to change it. I mean, we can change things in a matter of months rather than 5 years or a decade. We can change quickly. And I think states are willing to acknowledge when they've made a mistake and to improve upon it.
I think I have empathy for those folks who are from, if I lived in a city and I didn't live in Wyoming, if I lived in Los Angeles or something like that, I mean, I can understand if that's your world and that's where you live, how you look at pictures of Wyoming and you want to have ownership of that too, and you want to have decision making. You want to be part of the future of that area because of how important it is and what a gift it clearly is. So
Nephi, you're exactly right. I had, as you probably know, some of the meanest emails we ever got were when we were working with wolves, and 95% of those roughly were from out of state and from large metropolitan areas. But they do have a perspective. They look at Wyoming and other western states, and they want to see wildlife, they want to see open space, and I appreciate all of that. But we also have to make a living here. We also have the ability to manage. And I think one of the important things about your podcast is, and why it's important for outdoor recreation is, people, if you want really to sustain wildlife and you want to sustain natural resources, there's no better way than getting a first-hand view. and being on the ground and talking to the rancher and talking to the photographer that takes pictures of wolves and bears and to learn about it. And so one of the things we also touched on is, outdoor recreation and how to build that up, because if you want long-term sustainability of wildlife and you want the appropriate balance in the environment, which we all do, it starts with a deep appreciation, which leads to the passion, which leads to the involvement, and hopefully the best decisions being made, so that we all can say, and we all want, that all the generations past us will still be able to go out into Wyoming and enjoy the outdoors, whether it's taking photos or hunting or just backpacking, whatever it may be. And that's to get that, you have to not only have that appreciation for what we have here in the West and Wyoming, but a clearer understanding that it's not there's many areas that are nuanced, and it takes a depth of knowledge to make the best decisions.
When you were governor, did you frequently invite folks from these agencies where they're based in D.C. to actually come out and see things on the ground?
We tried to, and the with mixed results. But I always found that to the extent you can get people here and on the ground, and see that first sage grouse lek, or see where wolves are, or see that the rancher or the sportsman on the place where they live, you're going to have better success. It's just there's something about that firsthand look and the firsthand experience that leads to a much greater understanding than reading a brief in Washington, D.C., and never having experienced Wyoming and the West and the distances that we have and the rural population that we have. And our pride, as I often think about people in the oil and gas business who often are maligned, and some of those people are the most passionate people I know about the environment, and they choose to live in Wyoming because they love all that it offers.
So what you're saying is, if social media has taught us anything, being distance bad and being upfront and in person and seeing things firsthand is the best option.
There's no question about it, Mike. Yeah. It just really, I think, is, and we all learn that way. And it's, how many times have we read something about what we're going to go see, and then you actually go see it, and it's differed in so many ways.
Yeah.
Well, and not to keep coming back to wolves, but it just provides a great example on everything, I think, in the context that we're talking.
Dave loves wolves. There's no doubt about
it. From a policy standpoint, I'm thinking of how one of the big fights we had with wolves was this, what we call this dual classification system, how we have extra protections for them in the northwest part of the state around Yellowstone, and then fewer protections for them when you get outside of that area. And that area outside of what was called the trophy area was this large consternation, because it made up about 70% or so of the state, and people thought there'd just be this firing squad waiting for wolves to come out of the trophy area. And if anybody's been on the ground up there,
they could get to it.
You could walk all day and not see another house. I mean, it's if you can get there and then hike all day, you're not going to see another human structure. And so this idea that you're going to line up along this boundary and mow wolves down, it's completely illogical, but that's the argument that people that had never been on the ground here were making.
We'll just stand on the sidewalk next to the park, right? Isn't that
they're going to come right down the road out of the park?
Just like Central Park, right? Yeah. You use a sidewalk going around the outside, and we just stand. Oh, you mean it's different in Wyoming? Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's the 60 Minutes segment I alluded to. They had a guide on there that took somebody hunting, and my memory is, he said, it was 7 or 8 days of up and down mountains before we saw a wolf. I mean, that's the nature of it. And I think his words were, if you ever need to learn respect for wolves, this hunting trip taught you.
They're supposed. I've never done it, but they're supposed to be one of the most difficult animals to hunt.
Yeah,
because once they've been hunted for one season, they're always the predator. They don't want to be the prey.
Right.
And they've been a predator, so they know how to be elusive, and they do a remarkable job, and they're incredibly difficult to hunt. And in fact, it would be almost impossible from what I understand, to reduce the population through hunting alone to the point that it would be threatened again or need to be listed?
Well, there was a lot of conversation about that. Or with the hunting season, are you going to reduce between the 10 packs, 100 level that was and then we put a buffer on top of that, as you remember, because what we designed in the plan is we certainly did not want to reach a point where there was a question of genetic diversity, and talking to our game and fish, to Fish and Wildlife Service. We were very confident that there wasn't going to be this mass slaughter that some worried about. And like I said, I think the balance, never perfect, but I think we're about as close as you can get.
So wolves have kind of gone, it's almost, you really don't hear people talk about that issue anymore because of the success. What about sage grouse?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on sage grouse and the challenges of working through that, and there's an animal that wasn't listed. What was that like? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the sage grouse, as you know, and I'm sure many of your listeners know, it sort of put Wyoming front and center. Western states, most Western states have some population of sage grouse, but the majority of sage grouse are in the state of Wyoming. And when we reflected upon, the impact sage grouse being listed would have on the state of Wyoming, they look at not where sage grouse are in terms of protection, but where historically they've been. And the estimates were about 80% of Wyoming was covered in sage grouse at some point in time. So if the sage grouse was listed and you had restrictions on what you could do on 80% of the surface in the state of Wyoming, that has a profound effect, not just on businesses, but municipalities. Can they build a water treatment facility? Can they build roads? So the stakes were extremely high, and so when we began working through that, and we talked about the wrong path is just counting the birds. You can't just go by population. The critical component that you need is the habitat. You need to make sure the habitat's there, because the populations go up and down depending upon weather conditions, depending upon a particular disease that may come through. And so if you're just using numbers, you're going to be all over the map. Make sure you have the habitat, sufficient habitat for the population as a whole to thrive. And so Nephi, trying to do that was a project and a chore in Wyoming. But then added to that was, because we're not the only one in the game, how do you get the other states on board? And as we've talked about, every state has different points of view. But if Wyoming was, and this isn't the case, but if Wyoming was the only one that was providing those habitat protection, no other state was, we still were going to face, a listing. And so that, was a difficult chore, and again, in the model that we in the office put together, we reached a number of stakeholders. We put together a group with not only local people and state people, but the federal people as well, including the Secretary of Interior, trying to work on that, bring him here. I thought it was important to have a bipartisan effort, so it's not just a Republican-led effort. I asked Governor Hickenlooper, and he and I chaired that group, and I think that was the right way to go, because it shouldn't be a partisan issue. It really should be an issue that is directed by science and good sense.
So you said, you gave a lot of credit to all the different states, but I'm just going to say how I think it was. Did you ever? You led that effort. You really did rally a bunch of people, and you reached out to your colleagues and you said, come with me, let's do this. We need to do this together. Did you ever feel frustrated, trying to, because there were some other states that really wanted nothing to do with the fix. Was that frustrating at all?
Well, yeah, the process is, it's frustrating. But all of us knew that going in, that, people were going to have different opinions. What became more frustrating is when you thought you had a handshake deal on, a concept, and everybody's going forward, and then one state or another would hear from a particular group of people, and next thing you know, the Secretary of Interior is calling you saying, I thought we were good on this. How come such and such state's out now? And that made it difficult. And frankly, a little frightening as, what's going to happen. And so it was, if you ever wrote a book, Nephi or Dave, on, you talk about wolves, sage grouse was a huge deal.
Right. And I mean, you really effectively led and helped coordinate what turned out to be perhaps the single largest landscape level conservation effort that I can think of, not just in our lifetimes, but perhaps in our nation's history. I mean, we've done things like recovered bald eagles, but as far as you talked about can't count the numbers, it's got to be the habitat. From a habitat standpoint, this turned out to be just a remarkable effort across multiple states, state, federal, local governments, all the stakeholders, to get to the point where sage grouse were determined to be not warranted for listing. I guess I have my follow-up question on that is a lot has changed now since you left office.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of questions about the future of sage grouse now, and I don't know if you want to reflect on that or.
Well, I'll stay out of current events,
sure,
just because I don't want to. I'm probably not well informed enough to draw conclusions or opinions. But I will say, when I was in office, whether it was Secretary Salazar or Secretary Jewell, both appointed by President Obama, they understood what we were trying to do. And I remember Secretary Jewell quoting a rancher she talked to saying, if it's good for the herd, it's good for the bird, or if it's good for the bird, it's good for the herd, meaning that, management of habitat is not just a protection of sage grouse. It is inclusive of a lot of other things. If you take care of habitat, if you take care of the environment, you take care of a lot of things, including, the ag community. But, the question was, and the blowback was, how do you go about doing that? How do you do it in a way that is fair to all concerned? And how do you do it in a way that states feel like that they have the leadership in it? And so as you move past my time and, there's questions on, whether it's oil and gas development or any other type of development, we have to continue on the path that doesn't put us at risk of putting restrictions on 80% of our state because the bird is now listed.
So I need to follow up on the seriousness around sage grouse, but it's still a serious question. Have you been sage grouse hunting since the not warranted decision?
So I remember when we first, hey, we found a solution on wolves and we're going to have a hunting season. A reporter from the AP, his first question of me was, so are you going to go hunt wolves now? And I said, no. I mean, I wanted it clear. I wasn't doing that so I could go hunt wolves. And then with regard to sage grouse, when I was in junior high, my best friend at the time, his parents loved to hunt sage grouse. And so we used to go around the Pinedale Daniel area. And my friend and I, we'd actually didn't even hunt. We were throwing rocks and stuff like that. We didn't have the concentration level. But they were always successful hunting, and then they would cook the sage grouse. And I don't know the recipe, but I distinctly remember the dad of my best buddy. He had a pot, and he always had a 6-pack of beer, and it looked like to me that it was mostly beer in that pot and some sort of boiled thing. And I also distinctly remember thinking that I am glad there's potato chips and other things to eat. Now, people hunt sage grouse and like them, and so different recipes and different methods, I suppose. But I've not had that boy, what I'd I'd really like a chocolate malt. I really have the urge. I've never had that for sage grouse since I was a young boy. So.
I just need this livery flavor with a hint of sage mixed in.
So
Bud Light,
ultra red meat.
Bud Light flavor. I think it was.
The first podcast we ever did, we went to Seattle. All three of us flew out there.
Oh.
And on a weekend with Steve to go have a podcast with Steve Ranella.
Oh, yeah, Steve.
And and so
Steve and I went into the Teddy Roosevelt deal at the same time. Did you know
exactly
that?
right. I did.
Yeah.
Dave and I, we think often about how cool that was. To see you do that and win that Lifetime Achievement Award with Steve was just super, super cool. But when we were out there in Seattle, we brought Steve the best part of sage grouse.
Yeah, so
what is the best part?
Right?
I didn't know there was a best part.
I messed up because I actually meant to bring some here, but
you didn't. You didn't mess up. You done good, Dave. Perfect.
I appreciate that. It's nothing that you'd eat, but it turns out when you go to a lek in the spring, and after the birds have dispersed, you don't want to disturb them, obviously. But after they've dispersed for the day, you walk out there and you pick up some of what they left, some of their little nuggets, the treasures out there. Let it dry out.
I call it sage grouse turds. Actually,
sage grouse turds is a fair way to put it.
Is that allowed on your podcast? That sort of language?
Yeah, well, we try and keep that.
So you let them dry out. I mean, really, really dry, like no moisture left in them at all, and then I put them in just a aluminum pan, and I light them on fire, and it just burns like incense. One of those little pellets will go for about 15 minutes, and it's just this great smell. And so we took. You're looking at me funny, rightfully so, probably.
Is that different than I usually look at you, Dave?
No. This one is even more so. like you're really second guessing why you had me on staff if you'd known this about me.
So Dave likes to shoot the bird, leave the bird in the field, take the turds home.
Right.
I mean, which makes a lot of sense. It's sage grouse.
So we took some up. Actually, I didn't gather them up. It was sort of a last second deal, and I called a friend of mine at Game and Fish in Lander, and he went out into the field. He was doing a survey, and he went out into the field, and he gathered a bunch and mailed them to me.
It's tax dollars at work right there.
and then
Dave from the governor's office calls, asks for, hey, Game and Fish, I'm going to need you to send me some sage grouse turds.
and then we hopped on a plane, took it in our carry-on luggage, ran that through security, and took it up there and burned it in
it was weird
Steve's
when the
garage.
guy's like, so what's in the bag?
Steve allowed that then.
Yeah, he thought it.
He thought it was really cool.
He thought it was
A
pretty
couple
neat.
things. First, when you see Steve, give him my best. Always enjoyed being around him. And Nephi, I don't know in your 100 podcasts if your listeners have gleaned that Dave is. If you were going to say, things are really hard, who has something left to eat or to use? It's probably be Dave, right?
Yes, I would.
You've seen that show, Naked and Afraid, who can use anything.
Yeah.
I want your listeners to know Dave is that way. And so the fact that he is taking time out of his busy schedule to collect sage grouse waste and put it on a plane, it's not surprising, but I'm glad you didn't bring it to me, Dave.
Well, I guess I'm glad too. I thought you might have liked it, but I guess I'm glad I didn't bring it. I've got actually a friend of mine that knows I really that I enjoy burning this. In fact, you'll know the person that turned me onto this in the first place. But a friend of mine in Kansas actually sent me lesser prairie chicken and greater prairie chicken droppings, saying, "Hey, you should try these out. They just don't smell as good as sage grouse." But it was
there's a lot of scientific study that goes into this.
I guess I have another suggestion for a book for you, Dave. You could do the different flavors and smells of dung from the sage grouse.
It would be a short book. Smells good, sage grouse, moose. Smells bad, everything else. But the guy actually that turned me onto this in the first place lives up in the Thunder Basin, the Harshbargers up there. And I'd taken my daughter up there to turkey hunt on their place, and we were having dinner. And I've told this story before, but we were having dinner, and
but it never gets old.
It never gets old, right? We're sitting down for a big, 5 course of different types of meats dinner,
nice,
yeah. And Bob says, "Whoa, hold on, don't start yet." And he goes into the kitchen and gets in a drawer in the kitchen and pulls out a lighter and pulls out a bag of little Ziploc baggie of sage grouse droppings, drops one on a plate, puts it in the middle of the table, lights it for the ambiance, and then we started having dinner.
And Dave thought to himself, how can I make money on this?
I have a picture of my daughter sitting over it, wafting the smell into her face.
I think you should call all the high-end restaurants and let them know what they're missing out.
I think we've got something marketable.
Does it have a sage smell?
It does have a more than a hint of sage smell to it.
It's like it's like condensed.
But I'm just thinking that this.
It's like how condensed milk is better than regular milk.
The state,
like that.
The state's looking. We need to identify new revenue streams now. Things are really tough here.
This is a real opportunity.
This is an opportunity. We own the wildlife. We're not marketing the parts. We're marketing something else. But
let's move on.
I see an opportunity there.
On we go.
It's something I would have pitched as an idea to you.
Yeah.
Why don't you send me a brief on that and we'll move on.
So speaking of stuff that's going on today, likely Congress passes the Great American Outdoors Act today.
The Senate did earlier today 75 to 20. Oh, I might get it wrong. 73 to 25.
So they finally decided they could.
So it goes to the House next.
Spend some money fixing roads in Yellowstone National Park, but the other piece of that was a permanent funding for Land and Water Conservation Fund.
That's great.
And so, any thoughts on that? I mean, and again, I just feel like talking about how cool it was, just because I remember before LWCF was even reauthorized, there was discussion about whether it was even going to happen. And there were some members of the House that really just basically wanted to kill it. It just became a huge fight. And I know you went to D.C., you wrote letters, you led other governors and through NGA's Natural Resources Committee.
NGA being? National
Governors Association, Natural Resource Committee. And you got out in front of that. And I think, to me, what's exciting is the permanent reauthorization and the permanent funding both incorporated the principles that you had specifically asked for in your leadership, in your letters, which is hey, this needs to be fair, it needs to be equitable, there needs to be guaranteed money to the states and the federal government. It can't just be one to one side and none to the other. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, I'm really pleased. I didn't know about the vote today, Dave, that you just were talking about. But you're right, Nephi. We collectively, the office worked very hard on that and went back and testified. And that was my role as the chairman of National Governors Association Natural Resources Committee. But it also was Western Governor's effort. And I asked, when that particular time I went back to testify, I asked Governor Bullock from Montana, a Democrat, to come with me. And I was very glad he agreed to do that. But I remember testifying, and I won't mention the senator's name, but he, I think, was taken aback that I thought that the Land Water Conservation Fund was not only important now, but would be important for the years to come. And while we were not successful in making it permanent at that time, we were successful in making it available for important projects. And as both of you know, one of the key projects that fund helped was the purchase of the Kelly parcel that was contained within Grand Teton National Park. The state owned it, and the state sold it to the National Park Service. That put a lot of money in the state coffers to be used for education, our K through 12 education, and it preserved sort of this key piece of ground right in the middle of Grand Teton National Park that is so critical for that park. And so it's not some academic discussion of what that fund is about. It goes to projects like that. And if you believe in that sort of thing, that fund has been very important and will continue to be important for the years to come. So that's exciting news to hear what the vote was today, Dave.
Yeah, it's one step closer. I mean, it passed the hurdle of the Senate. It still has to go through the House. By the time this podcast airs, I imagine it'll be in discussion in the House. And we'll see what happens, but it would be one of the bigger conservation wins from a policy standpoint on the national level in a generation.
Well, I think it's the other thing. But when we were working on conservation efforts, whether it was a specific species or a specific area, there's always the concern that is that going to help or hurt the economy. And my eyes were open when I first heard the billions of dollars that outdoor recreation creates in terms of tax revenue for the country. It's an incredible thing. And I think that's the other side of the equation is what is the value of having the first national park in the world in your state, largely in your state. We share a tiny piece.
No, it's in our state.
Tiny piece with Montana.
Yeah, they try and claim it all the time.
And
but
Idaho, but we claim it as Wyoming's park.
A measuring error.
Measuring error. But, I mean, what is the value in terms of tax revenue to have that, or to have Grand Teton National Park, or have the first national monument, Devil's Tower? And then beyond the economics of it, what if you care about preservation of habitat and species? You have to have places like that where people, not just in the state or in the country, but around the world can go to, and what that means. And those are the places where you hear stories over and over that, as a child I went here, and that memory sticks with them for the rest of their life, and the family members that are with them, those special places like that. And so it is not just, we like the open space and the beauty and the wildlife. Yeah, there's an economic driver that goes with it. And then there's a sustainability aspect because that, seeing an animal in a zoo can give you an appreciation for that animal. But seeing, seeing a wolf, Dave, in the zoo is something. But when you see it, as you just did and took a picture at Laramie Peak of a wolf there, that gives even a great appreciation because it puts in context what it's really about and the space that it needs to thrive.
So this is going to be kind of a sort of a loaded question because I don't know how you're going to answer it.
Did you know how I was going to answer any other?
But right now, looking at this specific issue, it's a bill that everybody generally cares about. But if you get on social media and you listen to people argue about this, depending on which party they may or may not belong to, they're going to say, there's just a whole lot of mudslinging based on party. Why? Like, how did we get here in terms of natural resources? And I just wanted to, if I can, I know it's a tough question, but get your thoughts on why the partisanship and how do we avoid it moving forward for the better of what we all care about, which are these places that we live, these places that we call home, these places we care about.
Well, I probably answer it more broadly than you would your question would require or ask for. But I think that the nature of politics right now seems to do that with everything. The Republicans say, this is our point of view, and the Democrats say this is our point of view. And then there's a division. And even now, why are you wearing that T-shirt? That's a Republican or a Democrat T-shirt. Everything has got this pointed as that's a Republican notion or a Democrat notion, and it's a disservice to us all. Because if we really think for example, if I think in my mind I'm a Republican and so all my views are right and all those of the Democrats are wrong, I am completely missing the boat. And vice versa, if the Democrats think that. There certainly has to be middle ground on many of these issues, and particularly when it comes to natural resources. Do the Republicans not believe in having a great environment and to have great recreation places and what that brings in terms of tourism dollars? And by the way, you need open space if you want to have oil wells and gas wells. These things are important. Do the Democrats not believe that there is value in having these open spaces in terms of what it means in terms of people's jobs and careers? And then don't we collectively agree a celebration of America the Beautiful and how valuable that is? And so when you say, it's a Democrat idea to preserve the sage grouse, or it's a Republican idea to preserve the sage grouse, and so whichever party you're on, you're going to be against that. It really is not the best way to go, and I think that it's reflected in not just natural resources, but so many areas in this country right now. And you are really, I think we all suffer from being closed-minded if you think that the other side, whatever that is, doesn't have some viewpoint or some idea that is of value. we are hurting ourselves if we can't find common ground, in particular in the area of natural resources. Because as we pass on, and we should always ask, as you guys heard me many times say, what are we leaving for the next generation? Are we leaving, what I said is where you find one blade of grass, leave two. We each have an obligation, not just natural resources, but in every area, leave this place a little better than we found it.
I'm leaving a pregnant pause there. That was very intentional. That's I just wanted that to set in with people, because I know Nephi and I now both work for organizations that maybe find themselves on the different side of the political spectrum sometimes. We're both pretty aligned politically, and so...
But we like to act like we're not. We like to fight online. We like, in this podcast, we like to just torment each other.
It's for the drama, right? You got to have the
it's more entertaining that way.
But, I mean, I got some criticisms from folks on where I decided to work, because folks viewed it as a more left-leaning organization, right? And my response is, look, I'm a Republican, but I'm also a conservationist, and those two things aren't mutually exclusive, and they shouldn't be. And frankly, organizations need to have a mix of political ideologies to get the most effective results. And if you want to be effective as a bipartisan organization, you really need a mix of perspectives and personalities within that organization to come to the right middle ground that you're talking about. And that was one of the big reasons why I went where I did. And I can't speak for Nephi. He just
I will say,
he just likes guns.
I do. I really like guns.
Just, like, to an unhealthy level.
So for your audience, when you say Nephi likes guns, that's like, what is the biggest understatement ever made ever on this podcast or elsewhere?
And the sky's blue.
We'd be talking about, what's the appropriate budget for DOT, and somehow guns got into the conversation. I'm like, okay, I got it.
Hey, it worked.
Like, Nephi likes two big understatements. Nephi likes guns. Dave's cheap, right? I mean,
yeah, both understatements, right?
Hey, on a serious note, I think that I get frustrated, and I think we've kind of lost our picture when, there's organizations that I belong to, and friends that I have at organizations that make these statements about, like, everybody that belongs to this organization should vote for this party,
right?
Or you have to choose this or choose that, and I fully reject that. I'm very vocal about it, saying, like, no, that's not how it works. Those people represent us. Those parties represent us as people. They represent you. Right. It's not our job to, find out what the most, what they want and do things their way. No. It's that politician's job. It's that senator's job. It's that representative's job, regardless of party, to listen to you as their constituent. So if we're telling people, like, you don't have to choose between having a great environment and liking guns, you can demand both of those from the person who is your representative, regardless of what party they are. And if we don't do that, we're really just hurting ourselves, and we're allowing this division to continue by, don't vote for the worst common denominator or whatever you think the best is without, demand that they, as your representative, tell them what you believe and say, look, you work for me. Represent my ideals. Don't go someplace else. Don't go to D.C. and forget what we care about here in this state and what's important to us. And so I'll get off.
Well, I think I think too many times we're presented with false choices. I used to, when I was giving speeches about energy development, I said, we're presented with this, do you want energy development or do you want a clean environment? That's a false choice, right? We have to have energy, and we can go on and on about that, of the importance of having energy. But you have to have a clean environment, too. I mean, I want my kids to drink good water. I want my kids to be able to have clean air. So rather than one party presenting us with this side and the other this side, those are false choices. What is the reality? What's really practically, what are the solutions? We have to have energy. We want to have a clean environment. And I've said, the key to long-term energy development is make sure you take care of the environment. I mean, mean, administrations will come and go in Washington, D.C., but long term, you have to have an environment that we can live in. And if you want energy development, which I do, you have to take care of the land, the water, and the air.
And I've said to people frequently on the energy development side, what would you rather have? Energy development done the way that we do it in the United States, right, that has, admittedly, there's a fair amount of red tape in a lot of places. Maybe in some places too much, maybe in some places not enough, maybe in some places just about right. But there's a lot of environmental red tape to make sure that you have that clean air and clean water. Do you want to have that? And do you want to have that in this country? Or do you want to look at pictures of what's going on in some of these other countries around the world where energy development goes on unchecked? And it's absolutely causing negative environmental conditions and environmental harm there. And the water's horrible. The air quality is horrible. You have to wear masks when it's not a pandemic. I mean, all that kind of stuff. Right? And what do you want? I'd rather have it done the right way here than the wrong way someplace else, because it's still one Earth. We're still on the same on the same planet.
Right. Well, it's absolutely. I mean, we have one planet, we all live on it. So we shut down energy development in this country, which nobody's suggesting. But if we did, hypothetically, and we're importing all our energy from a country that doesn't have any constraints with regard to the environment, are we helping the planet then? And on top of that, not to go too far on this, but the safety with regard to how the safety we require in this country is how human rights issue is important as well. And so I don't even when we're talking about national security, it's tied to energy security. I want us to be energy independent, and if you're not energy independent and you're reliant upon a country to provide you energy that doesn't have the same environmental standards and can hold you hostage in terms of your policies because you want to keep the lights on, that is not a good way for this country to go. We want to be energy independent.
Agree. Go ahead.
No.
You had a question?
I was going to change this. I was going to I don't know, what do we call it? Transition. I was going to.
Yeah, I was too. But
gracefully move to another subject with.
I was too. But I wasn't even going to move to another subject, so I'll just make my statement, and then you can gracefully change to another subject.
For your listeners out there, clearly this is not a scripted conversation.
No, it never is.
I was just going to comment how cycling all the way back to the beginning, and how great it was to be able to work for you, and I think people listening and hearing you talk. And your perspectives on how politics should work and how stakeholder involvement and you working together to find solutions should be the approach. I think they understand why not only did I enjoy working for you so much, but why you also have my vote this fall for President of the United States, just like you did 4 or 3 years ago when I wrote your name in the first time.
Yeah,
where's the mute button? I've got to shut Dave down here. Yeah. Pull the plug.
Well, the way we've got it figured out is if Dave restarts the Bull Moose Party, in order for us to start taking campaign donations and really kind of start making T-shirts and stuff, we're going to have you first of all weigh in and agree to your candidacy.
Well, reflecting on the Bull Moose Party, so Teddy Roosevelt, he classified himself as a progressive conservative, which I find very interesting. And in today's world, nobody uses those two together, progressive conservative. But it's
perfect.
It trailed on, and Eisenhower even used that word and those two combinations. But the Bull Moose Party, known as the Progressive Conservative Group, how many years did they last?
That's irrelevant.
Yeah, we don't need to get back to
that. Okay. Well,
Teddy had a good run with it.
You put me in the category with a life cycle, 3 or 4 years maybe?
Well, I mean, how much do you want?
No, I don't want it. I say pull the plug on that. No.
But it doesn't change it. You can't stop me from writing your name in this fall. You're going to be stuck showing up on the ledger
I
somewhere.
think what's going to happen is you're going to bring sage grouse dung into the voting booth, and they're going to not allow it.
Yeah. Well, I kind of wanted to circle around and just say, are there any things like let's wave a magic wand. I'm not suggesting that that you're, but if you had 4 more years, and you didn't have to, and none of the pain and none of the sleepless nights or whatever, what would you want to tackle, or what if you could back up and say, wish we could have tackled this? What would it be? Is there anything that you look back on, you're like, man, I'd like to get another shot at that one?
I think there are some things that we worked on that I would have liked to have more fully developed. I don't know if you remember, but one of my first year in office, and for your audience sitting outside, the group here is Tony Young, who was my deputy chief of staff for a lot of years. Is during the first year, I said, I want to know where all the pipelines are. I want to know where all the transmission lines are. I want to know where all the highways are. I want to know where all the oil wells are, or gas wells, coal mines. I want to know where the wildlife corridors are. And we didn't have a way to overlap all of those onto a map, which seems like such a great tool. Now we have, with the great work of the University of Wyoming, we began developing that. But I often thought, if we would have had that year one, day one, Dave, you worked on the pipeline corridor initiative. What would it have been if we had that information right away in terms of planning and in terms of, just thinking about things long term? That would have been an area. Grizzly bears, we just didn't get where I wanted to go. And I felt that was unfortunate for a couple of reasons. One is when the wolves were delisted, within a day or so, I contacted Secretary Salazar, and I said, the next thing we need to work on is the grizzly bears. And because we had a good working relationship and I think a good working model, had he stayed in office, I think we would have had success. And we worked on that with Secretary Jewell as well. But it's difficult, it's hard. And then when they start introducing, new ways to count grizzly bears and how you go about doing that, it just throws. But I thought, not me, but I thought we had enough inertia from our work with Western governors, the national governors, with wolves, with Land Water Conservation Fund, that the staff and many people that I work with had the credibility and expertise to really move that far along. And so I'm sorry we didn't get as far as I would have liked on that. But it was part of the Endangered Species Act, where I think we, as a whole, did make greater progress, and the first time in many, many, many years, moved the ball forward in a way that was, I think, in good faith and fair and long-term, have some long-term importance.
And I will say that on that Endangered Species Act front, that work, that foundation you laid. So we all worked on that, right? And I think we all hoped that things could move a little quicker than they did.
Yeah.
But it's not done.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's that work is still the foundation for work being done in D.C. right now today.
Yeah.
On trying to carve out a path forward to remedy some of these challenges with Endangered Species Act implementation.
Yeah.
So that's an example of the work that you did, continuing on, the momentum continuing on past your time that would never have happened had you not taken that on.
Well, I hope that is so, and I think at some point it's true in Wyoming, true in the West, and I think true in the country that in order to get things done, in order to reach out to a group that you would normally view as on the opposite side, but you can find people who want to work in a good way, but it requires trust, right? And when we began working on the ESA, first I think a lot of people are like, there is no way we're touching that. You want to get rid of it, all of this stuff. You don't want to protect species. And it took time and it took their experience with it for them to learn that was in fact not the case. That when you talk about the Endangered Species Act and the species listed and the small percentage that have ever come off the list since the Endangered Species Act was passed, it's open for discussion. Is there a better way to address this? Is there a better way so that when somebody finds an endangered species on their ranch or their farm, it's not a bad news story? It should be a good news story. instead of, oh my gosh, I'm going to be shut down. How do we make it a good news story that we are finding and protecting endangered species? And that was what I tried to convince people of. We were working towards that. It should not be a bad news story to have an endangered species on your property. And the current state in my mind was that was a bad news story for too many people, that they viewed that they were just, their livelihood was going to be shut down overnight if they had an endangered species on their property. And that needs to be cured.
And, fingers crossed at some point, in our grandchildren's lifetime, it will be.
Yeah.
That's just sort of how it feels like it moves.
Well, I think that kind of circles around politically. I think that's the challenge. I think that all of us need to embrace as individuals and commit to. And I try, and I'm not the best at it, but it's like think out. Don't get caught in your echo chamber. Listen to other people, build trust. Because in my mind, that's the challenge with politics today. And maybe it's not the challenge next year, but today. That's the challenge, is the challenge of having that trust.
Yeah.
Of being able to say, yeah, it doesn't matter. I don't care what party it is, Democrat, Republican, whatever. This is my friend. This is somebody we share common goals and beliefs. We're going to work together.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that trust is somewhat lacking.
It is lacking, and it's wrapped up into lack of trust, and then egos too. I remember when I first became U.S. Attorney for the District of Wyoming. A friend gave me the best piece of advice ever. He said, when you first enter that door, leave your ego outside the door, because you've got to be open to hearing other ideas, and you got to recognize that you're going to be wrong, and that you're going to make mistakes, and you have to find the right way. And none of us should be, so confident in our views that we don't believe that. Good viewpoints and ideas can come from any quarter at any time. And the more we're open to that, the more often we'll be right than wrong.
I think the other thing on trust, too, is it takes so long to build it, and it can so quickly be erased. Overnight erased. And so one of the things on these initiatives that we worked with you on, you're building this trust over time, and one of the things you lay down right at the beginning is nobody's going to get everything they want.
Right.
And if the political tides change somewhere, now you feel like you can get a little bit more. If you try and grab that little bit more, now you've broken down the trust.
Right. No.
And so it's making those commitments up front to build that trust and building it over time, because it's just one decision, and that trust you've worked for years
That's
on
right.
is gone.
And it's grabbing for too much, that little extra piece. My grandfather always used to say, when a pig becomes a hog, it gets slaughtered. You just go too far, and you not only destroy the trust, you actually back up, and you're not going to get anything, because you're just going to have that block, whether it's from this party or that party, and you're not going to get anything. And so, get what is a reasonable amount and a reasonable compromise. And I know compromise somehow has now viewed as sort of a derogatory term, and I think about the country and the Great Compromise. And I don't know if you read John Adams' book, the book about John Adams by David McCullough, but it's a beautiful book about Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and George Washington, and the serious disagreements they had putting this country together. But the common theme was, it's better for us to move forward and create what we now celebrate, and not necessarily have everything your way, but collectively the best way, and actually get something created that's what we celebrate today.
So I want to be cognizant of your time. I have one more question for you.
Okay.
So for people that don't know, your grandfather was governor of Wyoming. And was a senator.
U.S. Senator, yeah.
And the cowboy senator, I've been told, and everybody knew him. And one of my favorite stories, so this is now sidetrack, was when he changed the allocation of, he worked to get the legislation passed to get a larger percentage of mineral taxes.
Back to the states. Yeah.
Back to the states.
Yeah, it went from I think it was 37% to 50%. Yeah.
Yeah, which is huge over the amount of time that it's been. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars to states.
Yeah, a lot of money.
Yeah, and my favorite story was about that was when you told the story, I believe, of when he went to the president, and the president said, well, the budget's too tight. I'm sorry. I'm going to veto your I'm gonna have to veto the bill. And then your grandfather looked at him and said, well, sorry, I'm gonna have to override your veto.
Well, it was President Ford at the time, and President Ford said, Senator Hansen, I hope you'll understand I'm going to have to veto this bill. And my grandfather said, Mr. President, I hope you understand I'm going to override your veto. And he did.
So that was before we asked a question. What's your favorite thing that you learned? What's the thing that from him, if you're going to say, like, this is like from that posterity, what's your lesson from him?
Well, I mean, there was many, many lessons. I mean, and I wish I could live up to all of the lessons that he taught. But one of my, certainly has always stuck with me is our family homesteaded, my great-grandfather homesteaded in what is now Teton County, Jackson Hole area many, many years ago. And my great-grandfather was in politics and was a state senator, Republican, and my grandfather was a Republican, and as you said, governor and U.S. senator. And my mom ran for governor, and she was not successful. She lost in the general election. So we are a Republican family. And I remember, the history is when Grand Teton National Park was going to change, and it was going to affect the cattle industry in Teton County. My grandfather, great-grandfather, and other ranchers actually did it was a protest, and they rode horseback, and there was cameras, and, not in a threatening way, but just, they always had rifles on their saddles, and just that was the way it was. Then most people rode with rifles for a number of different reasons back then. So it got a lot of national and even international press of granddad and great-grandfather protesting what was going to become the Grand Teton National Park and the implications that had in terms of grazing rights. And so they were all out against it. So my grandfather, in his 70s or 80s even, he was an elderly man, was asked about that, and he said, I was on the complete wrong side, and I am so, so glad I lost that battle. And that always struck me for a couple of reasons. One, that, it'd be easy at that age to, just pass it on. But for him publicly admitting that he made a mistake and publicly saying how glad he was to lose that. And I think that's the right way for a politician to be. And on the subject matter, I think it illustrates what we're talking about is that, we have special places that are worthy of protection, even at times when they can hurt our own economic interest. And in that case, the economic net economic differences, huge amount of revenue for not only Wyoming but for the whole West. So, in today's day and age, can the president, can senators, can governors, can the county commissioner be able to stand up and say, I was on the wrong side of that, and I'm glad that it went the way it did. And can the press have an understanding that, if you want to complain about politicians being so stubborn, you also have to have gratitude for when they say, I made a mistake. There was a better way to do it. Instead of saying that, if you admit one mistake, it means you're not fit for the job that you have. I mean, what other interactions do we have as people in our daily office or work on the ranch where you're not allowed to say, I made a mistake and we're going to improve it. But in politics, somehow that's viewed as a weakness, where I think ultimately it's a great strength and leads to better results in the end.
I've got one more question too.
Yeah.
I don't know that I can top Nephi's question, or it's going
to be Dave. I'm going to hold on.
It's all the question. It had nothing to do with the answer. It was all the question. So this is how we wrap up every podcast.
We're going to burn something.
We're going to burn something. Yeah.
It's going to be smelling
and then
like
we're going to burn something and shoot a bunch of guns.
You know that 30-year-old car?
I got my whole gun case out there, Nephi. I want you to go through it now. It won't be up to your standards, but it's full.
Well, that's all. That's good enough for me.
Anyway, in all seriousness, So this is the Your Mountain podcast, and we spent all this time talking about the policy around issues around land, water, and wildlife, and all these places that we hold so dear and are so cherished to each of us for different reasons. And we ask everybody that comes on to tell us what your mountain is.
Yeah.
What's the place to you that it can be an actual place, a metaphorical place. It doesn't matter. But
yeah, we've had a lot of different answers over the years, and all of them are just always amazing in what it is. So
for your listeners, Mike has been so just captured by my voice that he's just waiting silent.
Yeah, I told you at the beginning. I think I've said 3 words on 3 podcasts.
Well, I could probably give a metaphorical answer or a physical answer. I'll give a physical answer. So a very special place for me is up in the Grove in Teton County. My grandparents a long time ago bought a little piece of land up there. I think it's about 100 acres. It's a small piece, but the confluence of East Minor and West Minor Creek go right through the property, and they connect with the Grovemont River right there. And you have what we call the Red Hills, which are right there, and then you look and you have a direct view of the Tetons as well. And there's a couple of log cabins there, but it's a special place not only for its beauty, but it was a place that, as I said, I think sometimes these places are sort of build the foundation for family memories. And so we had so many great family times up there and experiences, and my brother and sister getting into trouble, never me. Life lessons up there, and working and failing and having fun and fishing and seeing wildlife. It's a special place, and it's part of it's special because I can go back there today, and I can see in the old tool set that's in one of the back rooms by the kitchen the tools that my grandfather used or my uncles used. I mean, they're all there. And the land's the same as well. And, of course, we've made improvements with fences and ditches and stuff like that, but it's the same. And there's something, I think, that grounds us to having, you see a pair of pliers or, whether fencing pliers or a hammer that you knew that your grandfather or your parents who may not be with you anymore, they used that in their hands, and you were with them, and you built something or you fixed something. That, to me, is that's a pretty good mountain.
It is a good mountain. I've never been there.
You haven't?
Well, Dave.
I tell you, the price of admission is not sage grouse dung, so you're going to have to. I'm just going to invite you.
Well, I could say that's the first time we've had
things went south here quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, Mike had to step out for a little bit, and Dave took over the session here.
He has a fascination with certain things.
Apparently.
Yeah, but that's a beautiful metaphor and a location at the same time. I mean, it's the first time we've had somebody mention a tool shed.
Been there, it's wonderful.
But it's the life lessons and the visceral reaction you have in thinking on it.
Yeah.
And being there. That's a mountain right there.
I want to make a pitch for your sister's book because it talks a little bit about that area. Muffy Mead Farrow, its head flew off by accident.
Its head came off by
accident. Came off by accident. So if you'd like to know more about the childhood on that piece of ground, check out Its Head Came Off by Accident.
That's Muffy, my sister, did a great job with that book. My brother and I jokingly say, hey, we don't remember quite our childhood, that instance where you came out the hero as you did. And she says, she looks good and we look like complete oafs. But her correct answer, as she's the smartest of the three of us, is write your own book then.
And so are you going to?
No, because she's right. She is the smartest, and I don't have the capacity to write a book.
Well, I imagine if you're not going to write a book, you got a lot of other things to keep you busy right now anyway. We appreciate, I can't express enough how much we appreciated our time with you and just respect everything you've done and appreciate everything you've done for the state of Wyoming and obviously for for us and then for being on here with us today. Just really appreciate it.
Well, what a privilege to be on your 100th, and congratulations to the three of you. That's that we've been talking about sustainability. Now you didn't do like 78 right yesterday, right, to catch up for that.
They're all very short. The other ones are very short.
We slowed up a little bit during the pandemic. We had to figure out. It took a couple of weeks to figure out how to record. Normally, we would just meet up in my basement and record together.
Yeah.
So we'd get together, once or twice a week, and then now it's kind of we had to figure out Zoom and.
Yeah, not surprisingly, the maven of technologies, we like to call him Nephi Cole.
Yeah,
figured it out.
Got us through it.
He did. I had to find a microphone that would work, and Dave used one that someone gave
So
him.
I'm surprised if Nephi's in charge of technology. This doesn't look like a bolt from a gun or something
Yeah, right.
like that. Or,
I look for ones that look
it
like...
doesn't have a scope on it or a peep sight.
It has a rack sound when you.
I suggested helmets with like all this on the helmet, so we could put the helmet on, look like... Navy SEALs or something. Dave shot that down.
That's not what we would look like.
No, we would not. We just look like weird office guys wearing a really cool helmet.
Well, again, congratulations to the three of you, and let me express again what a privilege for me to be able to work with the three of you in the years that we did, and I applaud you for the work that you did and the accomplishments you made on behalf of Wyoming and beyond. And I hope as you reflect upon your legacies and you are interviewed, if somebody else has a podcast, you recognize your accomplishments and they stick with you, and you remember that fondly for the rest of your lives. It's good work.
Well, Governor, if we sound a bit like, to our normal listeners, a bit like fanboys doing this podcast, I just want to say, honestly, we are. We're huge fans, and honestly, like I've always felt this, and we all feel this way. Thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you.
We feel very proud to be associated with everything you did.
Well, we had a marvelous team. Like I said, I miss being around you guys and getting to learn and work with you.
Well, we miss it too. So when you decide to run for something else, you just let us know. We'll sign right back up.
Yeah. Well,
Sounds like the turkey trot come Thanksgiving, or
whatever it is. If you want to do it like a Jeopardy tournament, or
I'm trying to think what's out there. Yeah.
Yes, we will.
Okay.
The three of you talk about that,
or we'll cut it out.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Anyway, for everybody that's listening, thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to catching you next time. And until then, remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.